Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Digital and Social Media Sports Podcast. Happy 2022. I am your host, Neil Horowitz. You can find me on Twitter at NJH287, also on LinkedIn, where I post more content. Visit the website, dsmsports.net, for more episodes and content. And, of course, check out the podcast, subscribe on your preferred podcast platform. So to kick off 2022, we're going to have a best of Digital and Social Media Sports Podcast episode. Coming out of the holidays, kick off your year with some snippets of a few episodes that you're really going to enjoy, going to inspire you for the new year, and hopefully teach you a lot along the way, and introduce some episodes that you may not have heard before that you can go back to and listen to in full. A quick preview of what's to come. You're going to hear from Brandon Natus. He's a great guy. He had worked with the Jacksonville Jaguars, Arizona Cardinals, and now is actually doing social media at Disney. We get into talking about his time with multiple NFL teams and just a lot of good knowledge and cool stories from him. Then we're going to talk to Rob Shack. He is with Reuters Sports at the time, and now General Reuters, the major media agency, one of the biggest media agencies in the world. And then we're going to hear from Josh Wetzel. He is with Auburn Athletics. Awesome interview there. Then you're going to hear from Kinsey Janke. She was then with the Tampa Bay Lightning of the NHL. Now she's with another NHL team down in Florida, the Florida Panthers. Really enjoyed the chat with Kinsey, so stick around to listen to that one. Finally, you're going to hear from Victoria McBride. She was awesome. She was with the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl for a while, and she's now with Turner Sports, working on their NBA properties. And then lastly, our last snippet is going to come from Doug Bernert. At the time we spoke, he was director of social media for the Detroit Pistons, and you're going to enjoy hearing about Detroit basketball. So that's a little preview of what's to come, but as noted, the first one you're going to hear from is Brandon Natus. Brandon is just a genuinely awesome guy. You're going to tell that he's really thoughtful about what he does. As I mentioned, he is now with social media, doing social media for Disney. Prior to that, he was with the city of Orlando, and prior to that, which you're going to hear mostly about here, he was with multiple NFL teams, specifically the Jaguars and Cardinals. And we're going to talk about what it's like to do social media for a team when the team is not doing well. He was with some teams. He'll tell you that one of his famous stats is the NFL teams he was with over 6 seasons never had a winning season. So he's definitely had to deal with the difficulties, the challenges of engaging fans during those tough times. We also talk about his philosophies around measuring social media, what it's like to collaborate across departments at the team level, what it was like when they hired new coaches. Just really tons of good stuff here in the snippet with my conversation with Brandon Natus. So stick around. You're going to hear from Brandon right now.
Arizona was really, really good in the sense where they didn't put any pressure on me to meet any sort of goals in that sense. They trusted me. I did the analytics report. I would say, hey, here are the key metrics. Here's how we did this week. And that's really how we worked, which I thought was really, really special. I think the challenging thing about sports is a lot of, there's a couple of exceptions, but for the most part, a lot of times those, growth and engagement metrics are typically a derivative of team performance. Yeah. Now, obviously there's exceptions, right? I know the Sacramento Kings are a team that's done a phenomenal job. I know the Sixers, even before they started playing well, did a really nice job. But Arizona never really said to me, hey, we need to have this is our growth number, or this is our engagement number, or this is our, the amount of sales that we're driving back into the business. They really let me just do my thing and didn't really put a ton of pressure on me, which is great. Because then you don't really have to force things for the sake of forcing it, right? You could just do your job the best way that you know how.
I don't want to portray it of that story of, hey, the director of marketing emailed me. Here's the post that I need to go out this week. I hope we're past that, and it sounds like you were definitely past that. But at the very least, to be able to collaborate with marketing, with events, with CR, with fan development, and say, here's what we got going on this week. How can social support it? How can social lead the way? Here are some of the things that our writers writing about. What can social do to amplify or complement that? What's that collaboration like? And how do you guys determine what should go out on social and what kind of influence your strategy and kind of overseeing it all.
Yeah, so that was the cool part. Is that really just, for the most part, it was me just determining kind of what went out. And whatever I wanted to do, I was able to kind of make my own. So if it was, the Breast Cancer Awareness Month, what were we doing for that, which is now, overall, Crucial Catch campaign that kind of evolved. And Salute to Service, the My Cause, My Cleats, like all of those were parts that I got to really spearhead. That was really, really cool in the sense where I was like, hey, if there were those bigger projects, like I got to really like kind of lead the way if I wanted to. So that was awesome to be a part of. It was very like collaborative in that sense. I'd work closely with, our senior manager of website was, now I think his title is Senior Manager of Digital Content, Darren Urban. He was my boss in Arizona. And so, he would give me kind of heads up when stories were coming, and, we'd work that in the social calendar. So, I would lay out the social calendar, and I kind of knew, having been in the NFL so long, all right, this is coming up this time, this is coming up this time. These are the important initiatives. How are we going to tell the story differently? And I think that was always a challenge too, is like, okay, how do you tell the training camp story differently? How do you tell the OTA story differently than you did last year? And even just day over day, how do you do it differently? And, about analytics and all that stuff and tracking yourself, I think the best thing you could use analytics for is how to implement it in your own strategy rather than comparing yourself to everyone else. And I think that was a cool thing that they never really did that. And I know some organizations do it where they're like, hey, why are we ranked here compared to here?
Those club reports can be killer sometimes if that's how your bosses look at it.
Yeah, and I think every team has different objectives, different resources.
Right.
If there's a team that has, 3 photographers working solely on social media and, 5 designers in their top priority social and 4 video people in their top priority social, like, of course their stuff's probably going to be better, right? Like, it should be better if they have more resources than maybe someone else where it's only, one designer spends some time on social or whatever. So it's kind of hard to compare, or like one team is really good. Like last year, for the Cardinals, obviously it was a challenge being, 3-13. And when you, especially when you lose your first couple of games, you don't have a lot of momentum.
Yeah. So
like for us last year, coming out of the gate, we lost our first game, I think like 24-6 or something like that. And like we had 1 touchdown and it was like later in the game and it was kind of meaningless. And then the next game we lost like 34-0. So you talk about your first 2 games, you don't have really any scoring highlights. And so it's like, you could be the greatest social media person in the world. It's very hard to, be near top of the line in growth as maybe the Rams or the Chiefs. Those teams do a great job, obviously, but, that kind of helps you a little bit when you have a lot to work with,
Yeah. The conversation we always have a lot is, you need to maximize the times when you're winning and need to control the times when you're losing, kind of. And like you spoke to earlier, is to have those storylines you can rally around. And you guys, at least you had Larry Fitzgerald, who any picture of him probably will get likes no matter what.
Yeah.
I think with football being different than the other sports is that if you have a 34-0 game, you can't just wash it away the next day or the day after that. It's a whole week where all of a sudden your content plans might have to shift, and you kind of have to. You have events coming up. You have CR events. You have maybe ticket sales you got to push a little bit. You have some sponsor content you got to get out there. Do you kind of have a different plan given how the team will perform, or do you just kind of have to adjust the voice you use or the way you portray things when you kind of just go through and continue to put out content even during those terrible weeks?
Yeah, so we did definitely adjust our voice a little bit. Going into the season, everyone's aggressive and excited and hungry, as they should be, because from the time the season ends through the time the regular season starts, you're selling optimism, right?
Totally.
But as soon as that whistle blows and the team doesn't play well the first couple of games, it's really hard. And so your voice kind of changes. Now, I did something, and we did something different than we had done before, in the sense that look, it was a tough season. Like, I think 9 double-digit losses, 5 losses by 20 points or more.
Oh yeah.
And a league both on parity. So, there's a lot of games where you were never really in it. So we did try to make it a little fun for the fans. Like, we lost 45-10 versus the Broncos on Thursday Night Football. It's not a pretty game. And so we posted like a GIF of like puppies swinging, and we're just like, there's a game tonight. Here's the GIF of puppies to cheer you up. And like, it was one of those where you're like, okay, some people on the football side may hate me, so I kind of veered a little bit from our strategy there. But I was like, I'm trying to do something to like engage these fans a little bit after a really tough game, rather than just saying like, hey, here's the final score. You know what the final score is, but here's me just posting the graphic for the sake of posting a graphic. So like, here's something different for you. And it did really, really well. And the cool thing was like, people at work the next day, like, were talking to me about it in a positive light. So I was like, okay. And so I was like, all right, okay, it wasn't that bad.
but that's kind of a calculated decision you make in the moment, and as opposed to say like, talking to Darren or talking to PR and saying, hey, if we're getting killed in some games, or I want to put this out there, even though I know it has a potential to rub one person the wrong way or some people the wrong way if it seems like we don't, we're not crying over a loss, or I guess what goes into those conversations for you to just push send and know that you have the trust behind it.
So when I was first getting started, I definitely went to Darren on pretty much anything that was aggressive, and I would say I still went to him for about, 85% of things that were aggressive, towards even till the end of my time there. Because he was my boss, and he was pretty good about like trying to have fun and stuff on social, and he got that, which was great. And I knew as long as he approved it, then we were good. Or he would say like, hey, maybe run that up the flagpole a little bit more.
Yeah.
Like the Stephen A. Smith thing. But for that, it was more of just like, okay, it's during a game, like, some games that just things move so quick. Sometimes you don't necessarily always have the time. And I know, I'm sure there are people that have everything planned out. And we were pretty good about having our stuff mapped out. But that was honestly something I thought about during the game. And I was just like, oh man, like, I think we should go for this. And I just did it and was like, all right, well, I hope that my access card still works tomorrow when I try to get in the office. And it did. So I was like, okay, cool. So that I think was all right. Okay, that's not so bad. But most of the time I'd ask Darren. A lot of times when we would do that stuff, it's not during a game. Just because usually the games kind of take over itself, and like, you get, Odell Beckham Jr. makes a great one-handed catch for a touchdown. Like, that's going to get engagement on its own. Now, obviously, to your point, how do you maximize it, right? Like, do you do a cool graphic the next day? What other cool things can you do from it?
Yeah.
But like in the moment, like as you're clipping the highlights and stuff, like that's going to get a lot of retweets regardless,
No doubt.
But when, you lose by 35 at home to the Broncos and they're not having a good season, it's like, all right, well, people are literally just going to bash this graphic of the final score. So we did another one where I think Atlanta maybe, like on Instagram, we put the final, final, and we put the numbers like microscopic.
Yeah.
So that was kind of fun, to try to do some of that stuff. And like people kind of started to play along and saw that, okay, we were trying to be a little fun, and the storyline ended up being, trying to talk a little bit about Josh Rosen, rookie QB, same thing, Christian Kirk, he got injured, during the year, but, that was kind of what we were trying to push a little bit more of. So, that was a little bit of the storyline. I would say this past year was definitely tougher to find one, only because, a lot of the games weren't really close, and, you're kind of just like looking for anything. So So doing some of that stuff at least got us some decent engagement.
Yeah, a few minutes left here with Brandon Natus, now with the city of Orlando, talking about his time with the Arizona Cardinals and Jacksonville Jaguars before that. I know we have only a couple minutes left, but I want to talk a little bit about having a new coach come in there, what that process is like for someone that's running social media. And just take me to obviously Bruce Arians was there for a long time, had a lot of success, and then Steve Wilkes came in for 1 year, but you guys didn't know that heading into it. So what's it like when you guys before the hire is made? How can you prepare when you guys get wind of the hire? What was the process like, and then getting his trust, learning what his brand and voice is, and how it's going to work with the players. What's that 360-degree look at pre-hire and covering the first press conference and then post-hire? Because I remember distinctly as I thought about our conversation, I remember really being impressed with how you guys handled it all.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing we kind of had, and I'll go a little backwards here, with the Kingsbury hire was that the year before we had just gone through the same thing with the new coach.
Right.
So I think that was helpful in the sense that, all right, we had just kind of done this, so we had a little bit of a blueprint from not that long ago, and you weren't trying to remember as much. I think going back to BA, obviously it's telling his story for a decent bit because he was so popular, and just kind of making sure that we kind of made sure that kind of riding out into the sunset, which we kind of thought was riding out in the sunset at that time.
Yeah.
We just kind of made sure that, he had, he got his due. And then what was crazy is the next day, Carson Palmer announces his retirement. So you kind of had two retirements going on at the same time. And it's different when a coach is retired versus fired.
No.
Because it's a little bit more celebratory, whereas when it's something negative, like a player being caught or getting injured or obviously when a coach is fired or someone else is fired, it's not a positive thing.
Right.
So from an organizational standpoint, you don't want to talk about it a ton. Now, obviously, unfortunately, that's the nature of the business, and a lot of fans, I think, from the social media sense, had kind of been posting that they had wanted Steve Wilkes to lose his job, which is unfortunate because he has a family. Thankfully, he wasn't out of a job for too long. Steve Wilkes is a great person. I mean, I met him once, and he knew me by my first name literally every single time, and addressed me by my first name, which is really cool because I'm very big on how you treat other people and the character. What type of character you have. And so, I mean, I remember one time distinctly holding the door open for him, and he's like, "Hey, I'm not going that way. I'm going the other way. How you doing?" Literally stop in the hallway to talk with me for several minutes to genuinely ask how I'm doing. And this is a man that's the head coach of an NFL team. And so for that, I'll always be appreciative and always wish him the best. Sorry it didn't work out for him in Arizona.
Right.
So then when he was let go, we kind of, I think a lot of times you kind of have a feeling that stuff's coming. So with BA, we were kind of preparing for either way, but we kind of knew that it was coming.
And obviously too, you guys might not hear it from PR or have a press release go out, but you guys read Twitter. I mean, you know when a rumor is out there, you can prepare based off an Adam Schefter report, even if it's not official from the team yet.
100%. You prepare. You'll see that stuff because those guys are all talking to agents. They know ahead of time. The Wilkes thing, it seemed for a couple of weeks it was heading in that direction.
Mm-hmm.
BA, you kind of knew it could be, and then obviously it just kind of seemed like it was going that way the last couple of weeks, and so we were prepared. We knew going to the press conference kind of how we were going to handle it. I had a photo ready to kind of put out on the platforms and do a couple of cool graphics kind of in the moment from his presser and make sure we had it live and then cut the clips. And then, from there, usually you have a little bit of time until you're hiring your next head coach. So then it's, okay, how do you cover the search, which every team handles it. Not every team handles it the same. Some teams, they'll publicly say, hey, we had this person in for an interview. We had this person in for an interview. Some teams don't. Arizona does not like announce it. So a lot of times you're kind of going off of speculation, and you know, and you're not really talking about it as much on social as maybe you are on your website. So that helps you prepare. But we really just like, you know, I look at content, I try to break it down by content type. So okay, what kind of graphics do we want to have that are going to tell the story of our head coach?
Mm-hmm.
What kind of videos do we want to have? What kind of live video, you know, and then break video down into live video, you know, web video, social video.
Mm-hmm.
What photos do we want to have? What articles are we going to have? And then you have that for your head coach, and then you have that for, you know, a smaller version for your offensive coordinator or defensive
mm-hmm.
coordinator, and then for your entire coaching staff, because that is obviously a big deal as well. Okay, who's our OC going to be? Who's our DC going to be? You know, and then how does our staff fill up? Because you usually get a couple big names. So, like, for instance, like Steve Wilkes was the head coach, but then Mike McCoy being named offensive coordinator. Well, there's a guy who's been an NFL head coach, has NFL offensive, has OC experience, and then same thing this year. Kingsbury gets hired to be the head coach. The coordinator is Vance Joseph. So, like, that's a big hire. So, like, you need to go further than just like one post on that, you know?
Yeah.
And so that's really how we just like would look at our content. We would say like, hey, this is how we're going to break things down by each piece, and like, what do we want to do to tell this story on each kind of platform with these different pieces of content.
Really enjoyed chatting with Brandon and keeping in touch with him over the years. So psyched for him to be at Disney. He's going to do some great stuff there. He's already been there for a little while now. And what a cool dream job to be able to achieve, doing social media for Disney. But next up on the Best of Digital and Social Media Sports podcast, you're going to hear a little bit of my conversation with Rob Shack. Really interesting conversation I had with Rob. When we did speak, he was vice president of sports at Reuters. Reuters is kind of like the Associated Press. They put out news stories. They're a service, an agency for media folks providing stories and content, photos, videos, etc. So when we spoke, he was VP of Sports at Reuters. He is now Director of Emerging Products and Special Events at Reuters. But super interesting conversation. In this part of our chat, you're going to hear about what it was like for Reuters, a company that's been around for several decades, a really long time, and how they've adapted to their services in the social media age. What it's like to develop content for these different platforms, different ways that journalists, reporters, their customers, their people may want to use on different platforms. We also talk about what it's like for a major media agency like that and vetting non-traditional sources, for example. When do you believe something that's posted on Twitter or is confirmed by a couple of sources, but you need to wait for others? Just tons of interesting stuff in the chat with Rob. So listen up to a little piece of that conversation with Rob Shack of Reuters.
Reuters has always produced content for multiple platforms, and it's always produced content in a way that makes it easy for that content to be used in multiple scenarios. If you go back to the carrier pigeon, right, for instance, you couldn't fit much more than a tweet onto that little tiny piece of paper that the carrier pigeon would carry, right? So we've always thought about the customer that needs to take a news story and use a little bit of it or a lot of it and write in a style that lets them sort of cut off the content where they need it to produce raw material that can be used on social or broadcast or digital from one video, enable the customer to be able to use it in all three places. And speed's always been very important to us. It's always, as a news agency that's competing against other news agencies, and especially one that was so focused in the financial space, being able to operate and beat our competitors at sort of the nanosecond level has always been something we measure and take pride in, and matters more now than ever that as soon as somebody tweets a piece of news, the value is pretty much gone in reporting it as a bragging right. Yeah. So all those things that were in our DNA are actually serving us really well in being able to serve clients who have multiple masters and new masters to serve every day. It's funny how when you look at it a certain way that, we've been built for change and keeping up with these changes, and we'll keep doing so as we go.
And I think you got something interesting there too, and that's the I guess the value of information is so fleeting now. You put out a tweet, the information's out there, and boom, now the value is sort of diminishing every single second of having that information, being the one to break it, so to speak. So I think nowadays we look at who can provide more insight, more access, more creativity as well, and who can maybe you turn it into an infographic or have some video that goes along with it. Has there been a greater demand for right? Do you guys even take into account creative services and being able to provide, here's not just the information, but also here's the photos you need to go along with it. Here's a graphic even. Here's a video. Or is that more on the publications to, have their design teams, have the creative teams, have their own teams kind of putting together what this news piece should look like to optimize it for consumption?
Yeah, what we're seeing now is not we spent probably up until 2 years ago a lot of our time thinking about how to develop content for social media. What we're starting to see now more and more, especially from the big players, is a desire to see Reuters develop its content and its newswires for use in applications. So the simplest case is the client who wants to be able to take photos from a photo wire and make sure they can route to the right place on their website, to under the match page of their website. Who want to have photos that are showing a score or a basket or a red card happen in the match be tagged as such so that it can automatically populate the right part of a match page. Who want us to make sure that the timestamps are 1,000,000% accurate in the photos we deliver, because they want to be able to use the data sources they have that indicate what happened during an event to find the right photo to go with that event based on the timestamp that something happened.
Wow.
Those are the kinds of things that we're being asked to do to enrich our content to serve new use cases that are popping up right now. So the time value might be gone, but the enrichment through metadata is one thing that's a popular topic right now.
So does that mean also that if I am working for a publication, I can almost set up an API or have something in place where I am pulling in the newest photos, newest stories almost automatically, rather than being let me check what Reuters has on my wire feed and then put it on my website, so to speak?
Yeah, and it's being able to find what you're looking for in the haystack, right? Because we produce 2,500 photos a day for a match. We might produce 120 photos for a particular match. So it's finding the one you want to automatically go to the right place is the trick.
Very, very interesting for sure. And I want to kind of hear about what you guys can do with that technology beyond that as well. And one thing I wanted to touch on in this conversation today, talking right now, which is Reset with Rob Shack, Vice President of Reuters Sports, and that is with distribution. You guys have been doing distribution for going back to carrier pigeons and everything in between, and that's something that no one does better than newswires like yourselves, and you guys are among the best. And now that's becoming more of a thing for sports. Is if I am Major League Baseball Advanced Media, how can I distribute my content in an effective manner? If I am a college athletics program, how can I get this content out to all of my student athletes and alumni that want to be able to share it? And so how is Reuters starting to dip their toe into that space? Is that a big I guess, solution that you guys see that you can offer to potential new clients or existing clients? Is that distribution secret sauce?
Right. So Reuters has 3,000-ish clients around the world, about 800 of which are broadcasters. The ability for us to take and all of those are clients of ours. They depend on us for all those raw materials they might use in their daily news publication. What's happening with sports leagues is that for a lot of really good reasons, in and of themselves, they're becoming producers of content in ways that start to look a lot like newsrooms that we're used to serving, right? Whether it be for their own social, their own websites, their own over-the-top services, to fill gaps in news, in general news coverage that they wish weren't there, left by shrinking newsrooms, or maybe not an interest from the traditional news organizations in coverage of certain events they're running. For a lot of reasons, the leagues themselves are becoming news publishers in their own right, which leaves them in a position, and leaves us in a position to really serve them in two ways, right? So just like a local paper might need access to the photos we take from an event that league may not have reach into, they may need content from us to help them run their new sort of quasi-news operations. And also on the other side, where they're producing content that is interesting, that our traditional clients want, partnering with them to bring that content onto our platform so that our clients can access it through the way they normally access news coverage is an aspect of partnership we're trying to start developing. And that's a good example of the deal we just did with the PGA, which takes highlights and previews from the events that the PGA is organizing and makes those available on our platform the same way our clients get an interview we might do with a player. They're now able to get content straight from the PGA, clearly labeled in a transparent way, in in the way that they are used to receiving it, with the metadata clipped the way they expected, tagged the way they expected, for the rest of the content that comes into their platform through Reuters. So a big part of what we're doing through this new initiative called Action Images is to build partnerships with leagues that enable them both to easily use our services, but also where we help them with distribution to the global news world.
And tell me if you can, like, how does it work? I mean, I can't imagine there is some army of people actually inputting metadata for every single highlight that's being clipped, even especially if it's being clipped automatically or using some sort of AI. If I want to be able to look up, all the putts from Tiger Woods at the Masters, and I can do that via, the video wire. Where's that metadata coming from? How is it being input so quickly and so effectively?
Sadly, most of it is manual today. I think we're getting to a point where that is another type of service that Reuters would be able to offer, right? So where we're looking to develop automated techniques for, right now it's mostly in transcription, but quickly becoming more sophisticated than that through things like facial recognition, entity recognition, automatic translation. There are all these services we're starting to bake into our platform because, again, it's hard to find an organization that produces more video than we do on a daily basis and needs to clip it from such a large corpus to start with as much as we do. We're developing all those services that you hear about that are the future into our platform slowly now, and as we go, we'll be offering that those sort of capabilities through these partnerships as part of what we can offer. So today, we behind the scenes, we just we're doing some automatic voice to text to help with searching of content in our platform. There's not much more automation than that happening here. There's really not that much automation happening at the leagues on a day-to-day basis. Right. You hear a lot of hype, but it's not in day-to-day practice that much yet, but coming soon. And we know that, they know that, and that's the kind of thing where Reuters can make the power of what we do more easily accessible to the smaller operation.
Definitely something to look out for in the months and years to come here. And on the other side of data, I want to hear kind of about the data that you guys get just from serving so many publications, so many clients all over the world, and that is kind of the data of what content is being searched for, being used. I mean, it's probably kind of cool for you to look at and say, okay, this thing we put out was utilized this many times around this this part of the world, and this search was made this many times. This is trending right now. You guys probably have quite a bit of insight, whether you utilize it proactively or not, into what's driving interest all around the world. I mean, what kind of insights do you guys look for, whether that's to drive the business of Reuters or just to be able to provide sort of industry reports or worldwide reports? I'm just imagining this treasure trove of data around what's kind of buzzing and what you guys are able to do with it.
Yeah, I think the first, I should say, we're swimming in data, and I think that's an understatement. And often, how to analyze that data and what to do about it are still require human thinking and analysis. And so, what we see a lot of is clients looking for what's happening in my own area, what's happening in my own region. Mm-hmm. News clients generally have a regional focus, and they start by making sure they know about everything Reuters is reporting about their region, sort of an expanding circles radius outside their space. Beyond that, what they're looking for are access to stories about the hometown hero done good over far overseas. Yeah. So when a basketball player from Latvia is playing in New York, or a basketball player from New York is playing in Latvia, right? There are stories to be written from far away in the hometown publications. So helping our clients make those kinds of connections more easily is one thing that we know based on data we want to do better at. Helping them sort of get in their face, hey, your hometown guy did, or hey, hometown girl did good here or there, and you should know about that. The second thing we see a lot of in sport is a thirst for more authentic stories about overcoming obstacles, right? And we see this a lot with the big set piece events, especially. So Women's World Cup is coming up, for instance, and there's a lot of activity happening here and amongst a lot of our partners who are thinking about how to tell those stories the right way, because we know that there's interest from fans, there's interest from sponsors to have activity around those types of stories. And what's happened on social media is that the Gen Z fan and younger has an expectation that they're going to have more access to more authentic stories experiences around the athletes they've grown to become fans of. So we need to find ways to adapt to that expectation as we go.
Yeah, and I'm imagining too, as you talk about sort of the international nature of it. Is there a lot of translation going on? If I want to read a story that from an interview with Dirk Nowitzki in the United States, but I'm in Germany, I need to be in German. Am I just using a translation service, or are you guys producing different stories? I'm trying to figure out how that works.
We are, yeah. So the way Reuters work is the way Reuters. The way any really big news agency works is through a bureau system, right? So we have a London bureau, a New York bureau. We have 170 bureaus. I'm looking at Heather. 200 over 200 bureaus around the world.
Wow.
In 170 countries, and so each one of them is making decisions on what they should cover, and what they're also doing is looking at what should be translated, right? So when a big story comes out on the wire, on the Egyptian wire about Mo Salah, right, for instance, it may come out in Arabic, and then someone on the English desk has to see that that's a big story and decide to translate it into English, and vice versa. So translation happens by experts in the local region to determine what that region is going to be interested in, or what the consumers of that language will be interested in.
Oh, interesting. I appreciate you answering that. One thing I definitely want to go into, this is the Digital and Social Media Sports Podcast, so I want to talk a little about social media.
Sure.
When you and I first started, social media wasn't as big a deal as it is now, and now we have, obviously teams putting out stuff on their social platforms. We have news publications kind of balancing the balance act of going to my website versus going to my social media. We have players creating stories themselves just because LeBron puts out an Instagram post and all of a sudden it's international news. And so I'm trying to imagine, how does social media kind of fit in for Reuters? Are you guys, is someone watching social media to sort of look for news that might break as an outlet? And are you guys looking at the kind of the not the velocity, but the lifespan of news being shorter than it used to be? And where does social kind of fit in for Reuters? And I'm just kind of curious as to your mindset there, and also how it affects your day-to-day.
Yeah, so I mean, look, for monitoring news, I don't think we're using anything else, right, at this point. I don't think anybody is. I hope they're not. It's the only way to monitor what's going on. And so, you'll see as many tweet decks open if you walk across a news floor as anything else. And we've even built some of our own tools that help us to monitor social media activity, to look for stories, their trustworthiness, their veracity, their newsworthiness, and sort of, again, for ourselves, separate what's important from the noise that's out there. We have our own team that is responsible for analyzing what content might be viral, and finding an early beat on that and licensing it from UGC copyright holders, the creators of viral content, getting them to allow us to distribute newsworthy content on our platform. I think we produce between 15 and 25 of those a day. So content created more and more by by civilians that goes up on social media is making up a larger portion of the wire that we distribute. We're not precious about making sure everything we produce is produced by us. We want to get our clients everything they need to produce the news for their space. So we're using social media liberally to help us find it, access it, and redistribute what's the best stuff, and give our clients a legal way to do that in the process of what we do on a day-to-day basis.
So in some ways, if I am, let's just use USA Today Sports as an example. If I all of a sudden there's a recruit from Ohio State that puts out a tweet that he's committed to Ohio State, you guys are doing the work for him, so to speak, where you guys are monitoring the social platform, so okay, this just broke. We better get this to them, and then they can curate it and report it. So in that manner.
Yeah, I mean, more or less, yes. But we're validating too, right? So it's a matter of, is that account real, right? I think we've all been tricked by a fake account here and there. So it's helping our clients validate, is that account real? Is the content of what's being presented accurate and true and not manipulated in any way? Is it and doing the legwork to call and get multiple sources against that content are all the things that happen after we put out the statement that says athlete X says Y.
Yeah.
We try to validate and get away from being able to only say he said it, but also be able to say it's true.
Good stuff from Rob Shack. Again, he was then the VP of Sports at Reuters. Now he is the Director of Emerging Products and Special Events. Super interesting conversation, so you can listen to the full chat in the podcast feed. But next up on the Best of Digital Social Media Sports podcast, we're going to take a trip into college athletics. Really enjoyed this conversation. I've known Josh for several years now. Time just flies by, and he's been doing a great job with Auburn Athletics for a long time now. This next excerpt is going to come from my chat with Josh Wetzel. He was then the digital media specialist for Auburn Athletics. Now he is the assistant director of digital media for Auburn Athletics. Hashtag War Eagle. But it's super interesting stuff. We're going to talk a little about what Auburn Athletics infrastructure looks like, what their team looks like, what it's like to build a brand across all these multiple sports when you're trying to reach also fans and recruits and alums, different audiences, the challenges of college athletics. Working with Coach Bruce Pearl on the men's basketball side, where Josh spent a lot of time, and just tons of interesting stuff. Really like talking to Josh. He is thoughtful, gives great answers, good practical advice and tips. So listen up to a little bit of my chat with Josh Wetzel of Auburn Athletics.
That's a good question. So for most of our sports, we try to have a specific look. Now each individual sport has kind of a little bit of leeway to kind of make that fit their sport in different ways. Like gymnastics is not going to look exactly like golf, and golf's not going to look exactly like swimming. There's a little leeway in the way they change things. Our graphic designers do a fantastic job of that, and our videographers kind of, they do a really good job of that as well. Like football, football and basketball, they're obviously our two big revenue drivers, and so we put a little more behind those, and so they kind of get their own looks. And with me running the men's basketball accounts, like I'm a little selfish, obviously, and so I'm gonna want the best look for them, and then football's gonna want the best look, and so they have their own looks. But then across the board, we have a similar look that has a little variety in it, I guess you could say.
And how does it work with kind of divvying up your creative resources across the board? I mean, if I am, covering men's, women's golf as an SID, I want a really nice, gift to be ready for my national championship, tournament or SEC championship tournament, whatever it may be. Like, is there something that, do they come to you? Do they submit sort of a creative brief to the design team? What's that content creation process like? Because there's just so much volume potentially.
Yeah, so we have here at Auburn, we have what's called we have a pod system, and every team has a pod, and in that pod there's a graphic designer, a videographer, a digital media representative, whether that's me or a student, and then marketing representative, a team representative, usually like a director of ops or an assistant coach. And then, so we all have meetings and weekly, and then we kind of discuss like, all right, what's going to happen. And specifically with basketball, we'll get together and we'll be like, all right, these are the things we have coming up. These are the things we kind of want to highlight throughout the week. And if we win or whatever, these are the things we want to do. How do we best visually represent that? And so then, I have a really good relationship with my graphic designer and videographer. And so, I'll kind of bounce off of them, all right, what do we use for this? Do we use photo, GIF, video, graphic? Like what's going to best tell the story in this situation? And so every team kind of has that. And so we try to stay, I tell, the SIDs and, my social media students all the time, I'm like, think, a couple of weeks in advance, at the least. And then that way when things come up, it's a little easier to react in those situations.
Yeah.
So everybody kind of gets together and figures out like, all right, how do we best represent what's going to happen, in a national championship? Do we do a graphic or do we do a video, or how do we represent that moment?
And then as you guys are planning, are you getting down to the level even where you're like, okay, here's what we want to have produced in the next 2 weeks or next week or whatever, and then are you like making estimates? I have this designer for 30 hours this week, and this graphic is going to take around 3 hours for this graphic. We'll say this video will take 6 hours. They'll be out in the court for another 2 hours filming. Like, are you guys getting down where you're kind of planning how you're going to allocate those hours each week, or is it really just, these are the tasks that need to be completed, whether they can be done in 2 hours or 20 hours?
Yeah, no, we don't get that deep into it with the hours. We just kind of divvy it up like, all right, these are the things we've got to do. So we've decided in this situation we're going to use a video or a graphic, and we just kind of let the creative people kind of have that freedom. And we're in a really good place where we have a bunch of full-time videographers, a bunch of full-time graphic designers, and then we have some part-timers as well. And so we don't necessarily get down into the hours of it. Now, if we get in a situation where we're like, all right, we need a video for this, our videographer might be like, well, so if we're going to do that, then I'm going to have to take this off my plate because it's going to take me this amount of hours to fulfill that request, essentially. If that makes sense.
No, totally. I appreciate that. Now, let's have a great conversation with Josh Wetzel, digital media specialist for Auburn Athletics. He's letting me pick his brain here about how things work at Auburn. I want to get into a little bit of basketball now. It was a hell of a fun year for Auburn. Not quite as long as you guys would have liked, but still just what an incredible ride. I'm sure it was fun for you to be a part of it. But let's talk about really how that team has come together over the last few years. You had Coach Pearl kind of come in there and establish a culture, and I'm always curious to see, especially those larger-than-life coaches like Bruce Pearl, who really has become kind of a face of the program there, in more ways than one. How much he or his staff has a say or is pushing you guys to, hey, let's this content was great, or I want us to do more, or kind of being that cheerleader for what you guys are doing to represent the team and their successes and the individual student athletes on the digital media side. Like, what's that give and take like, and how much does the coach kind of influence the kind of content you guys are producing?
Honestly, like I tell people all the time, like Bruce Pearl is probably my favorite coach that I've ever worked for. He expects a lot out of his team, his players, his staff, his support staff, everybody. I mean, he expects championship caliber out of everybody. With that being said, he kind of gives, especially the creative team and digital media team, a lot of leeway on like what we do. He just wants us to celebrate, what the kids do, essentially. When Bryce Brown's doing well, he wants us to celebrate that on social media. With social media being a big part of recruiting, he'll basically, we're involved with the staff and everything, and our SID Cody, he does a fantastic job as well. And so they kind of give us some leeway of what we need to do, and then they'll kind of give us, maybe we need to talk about, our 3-point shooting percentage, or, just give us some things that they would like us to push to kind of help drive the narrative a little bit. Mm-hmm. But, man, it's been awesome working for Bruce Pearl. He's just real down-to-earth guy. He really appreciates everything that everybody does, and that's a big thing in our industry now, where everybody's kind of, quote-unquote, overworked and underpaid. In our industry, it's, a little bit of gratitude and thankfulness. I mean, that goes a long way. And Bruce Pearl does a great job of showing his appreciation for his support staff.
Gotta love that. Let's have some more fun talking about the March Madness run. From the digital media side and the creative side, like when you guys are going into the SC tournament, when you guys are going into Selection Sunday, when you guys are starting to play each of those weekends, and you kind of got to be ready for everything, ready for not just your opponents, but ready to be able to react to a crazy play or a crazy finish. Like, is it just a matter of having as much ready to go and prepared as possible, or just making sure that the creatives are empowered to react in the moment and provide you guys with what you need? And how much planning can you really do with some of these just crazy dramatic finishes and things that you won't necessarily be able to have advance notice of?
So we try to give our creatives a lot of leeway to do essentially whatever it is that they feel best represents that moment. But going into the SEC tournament, we had a pretty good plan of if this happens, this is what we're going to do. Of course, championship games on Selection Sunday, we know that we have an idea that we are going to be in no matter what, right? Mm-hmm. And so Selection Sunday wasn't a huge priority for us. But internally, we knew that we could make. I mean, we had a good side of the bracket. We knew that we could make a deep run into the SEC tournament, and so that became a pretty big focus for us was that deep run in the SEC tournament. I mean, we bought in. Coach Pearl, I mean, he believes, he's the best cheerleader in the game, but he's going to tell you how it is, essentially. And if he feels like he can make a deep run, he's not just going to say it just to say it. He really feels that way. And so, we bought into it, and we really planned and pushed hard for that. And obviously, making that deep run and winning the SEC championship game against Tennessee, I mean, you can plan for that, but, the good thing with my staff and with basketball is we try to be as organic as possible. And so, we had some things planned out, but after that, we just kind of went with whatever came to us, essentially. Like, the celebration on the court, we knew we wanted that, a big part of that. The cutting down of the nets, we knew those things were going to happen. But then, the locker room moments and stuff like that come up. Those are things you can't really plan for. And so we planned for as much as we could, and then we adapted to everything else, essentially.
But you guys knew in advance that Coach Pearl was okay with being in the locker room after the games, or being in there before the games for speech. Is that kind of that trust built in, or even discussions you have ahead of time?
So like I said, with Bruce Pearl, I mean, he's a great coach to work for, and we actually established that relationship early. I mean, before every game, we have our video guy in there and photographer. After every game, win or loss, we have our videographer and photographer in there, and even sometimes one of our website guys. And I know a lot of coaches, they don't necessarily like that, but Coach Pearl kind of gave us the freedom to kind of do whatever we wanted in that moment to an extent. We would even go in, like when we lost by 30-something points at Kentucky, Coach Pearl let us in the locker room post-game, and we put out a video from that moment. Like, we want to show those hard moments, because that's something that a lot of teams don't do. They don't show the hard moments.
Yeah.
And so their fans kind of rise and fall with the momentum. And if you can bring in those hard moments, it kind of humanizes everybody, and everybody feels like they're actually on a ride.
Totally.
And so we established that relationship through the season, and so when we were in the locker room post game after that win, like, that was a normal thing, and so it was great.
That's an awesome way to put it. And yeah, if you want fans to be emotionally invested and emotionally buy in, you gotta let them be with you there for the good emotions and the bad emotions. That's what makes the season what it is. Most teams are not gonna end up going 35-0 or 40-0 or whatever. It's nearly impossible these days, and so you gotta be there for the good and the bad. And it makes the good that much better that way, and it makes the fans that much more invested from now until the end of time. As you guys are making a run, is there a point when my buddy Dan Heck, who is among the leaders in marketing there, do they come to you and say, hey, let's make sure we're also hitting up digital media for donations, for season ticket sales for men's basketball, merchandise, and I'm sure the Fox College folks get in there with their requests. Is there a little bit of, especially when you guys start to ride a wave of momentum, and it just seems like, and you realize you're making a run to the Sweet 16 and beyond, is there a point where marketing comes in and says, hey, let's make sure that we can capitalize on this from this perspective?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, a lot of that came in the planning process. We have a good relationship with our marketing team, and then like our merchandising, we use Die Hard, and they run our AU team shop, and so we were, the week leading up to SEC tournament, we kind of had an idea of what we were going to have in case we won, and so as soon as the final buzzer sounded, I knew my creative team, they had everything on the court, all the celebration and everything, and I was essentially in the background. I had all the graphics I needed, all the links I needed, and we were putting out merchandise and stuff like that. And the good thing about my role is I also run the Auburn Tigers account, which is our overarching account for all of our sports. And so, I put out Final Score for men's basketball, and then I switch into Auburn Tigers mode, which I'm capitalizing on the momentum. I'm selling I'm getting merchandise links out there, and ticket links for NCAA tournament and that kind of thing. And so we really try to, and as I'm doing that, Dan's also shooting out emails to our email list, and so it was a well-oiled machine essentially.
What's your observation from being in it now of what the best way to go about it is? Do you want to get that stuff out there right away? Do you want to let the wind ruminate a little bit because people's timelines will be going crazy and people might be running over to tumors and you might want them to wait till the next morning to see those posts when they can kind of wake up? Is there sort of a protocol that you found works best, or it's just get it out there when people are at their emotional high, even if they're running on their mobile devices from a bar to tumors?
Yeah, for me, I like to kind of do a mix of both. We might put out something, get your, like right after the game, we might put something out like get your championship T-shirt today, and so that's capitalizing on the people that are on social media at the moment. They're in the conversation, and we try to enter ourselves into that conversation to be able to capitalize on that moment, and then the next day. After everybody's rolled tumors, they've kind of come off of their emotional high a little bit. We try to bring that back up, and we'll find a creative way to bring the moment back to life, and then also, generate some revenue sales through that as well.
Very cool. Last one on the March Madness, and I appreciate you letting me indulge here. I know that there has been some, conversation among social people about the limits what you can use from a game highlight perspective. What's that education process like? And did you guys actually have to have conversations internally about, okay, here's what we can't do, so let's talk about some good ways we can work around this, like getting post game stuff or getting warm stuff from warm ups or hype videos. What were the restrictions, and how did you guys talk about working around them?
The March Madness restrictions, they are what they are. It sucks, and it sucks for everybody. Last year, we kind of had the opportunity to do a little more through Turner Sports. They kind of gave us a little leeway to do a couple of extra things. And then this year, they kind of went back to the old ways, and it sucks. It is what it is, but we definitely got together. We kind of came up with a good plan of like, all right, here are the moments that we can show, and here are the moments that we can't. And so we kind of formulated our plan around that. Now, we did end up getting in trouble after the when we clinched our spot into the Final Four. We essentially put out a video of the celebration and everything on the court, and within the rules, we weren't, everything inside of the bowl belonged to Turner Sports, and so we had to take the video down. But then we kind of not really made fun of it, but kind of played off of that, like, oh, we had to take this video down, so here's this instead, and so that created a little more conversation within our fans, and brought back up the excitement and everything. But I mean, it's something that we all plan for, and sometimes you're gonna break the rules, and you're gonna have to take a video down, and it's part of it. But if you're not living right there on the edge, you're not really doing it right.
Good stuff from Josh. Again, he's now the assistant director of digital media for the Auburn Tigers. Keep an eye on everything that Auburn does. They just do phenomenal work with their athletics, social media, and Josh plays a big role in that. Next up on the Best of Digital Social Media Sports podcast, we're going to go into the hockey world. You're going to hear a bit of my conversation with Kinsey Janke. I've known Kinsey going back way too many years. When she was first coming up, when I was young in my career as well. She is now the social media manager for the Florida Panthers. Previously, the social media manager for the Tampa Bay Lightning, being there for some great Lightning teams, and now able to do the same for the Panthers, as the Panthers are really coming up and making a charge on and off the ice for sure. But in this part of my chat with Kinsey, you're going to hear about what it was like for her to really pick up the Lightning's brand and who they are, being able to market a hockey team in a quote-unquote non-traditional hockey market where the Lightning have just really done a fantastic job, including while Kinsey was there, having fans around the world with all their various players with their nationalities, and what it's like to approach live content. At the time we spoke, live was really becoming bigger and bigger, and it still is today. And what it's like to go live when have the trust of the people that you're filming, and also of the supervisors as well on the team. So listen up. A part of my conversation with Kinsey Janke, again, then with Tampa Bay Lightning, now with the Florida Panthers. Listen to some puck chat.
We definitely want to be innovative. I think everyone would say that.
Mm-hmm.
But we also, I think when it specifically comes to social and obviously when things like Facebook Live and, Periscope then got a lot more popular,
Mm-hmm.
and you could literally just go live whenever you felt like it. I was always really kind of, I don't know if stringent is too strict of a word, but I would always tell people, I don't think we should go live just to go live.
Yeah.
It should be something useful and it should be something cool. And if we're going live, it should be, one, something that fans really want to watch and maybe don't have access to normally. But also, if we're going live around the players or around a practice or things like that, they have to know we're doing it. We can't obviously edit live stuff. And if we're showing stuff that maybe we shouldn't be, that obviously opens up a whole thing. So we're definitely pretty careful about that stuff. We also have some restrictions with our our RSN and our broadcast deal
Mm-hmm.
about certain things. But when I first started, IG stories hadn't existed yet, so we did a lot of stuff on Snapchat. Player stuff. We let two of our players take over. As they went to the St. Pete Grand Prix, we had them take over, and it was probably the funniest thing I've ever experienced in my life.
That's awesome.
But once Instagram stories became a thing, we were kind of doing Snapchat and that at the same time. And then about 2 years ago, we switched totally just to Instagram stories.
Mm-hmm.
Just because we have a way bigger base on Instagram, and our players are super, super active on Instagram, so it was a great way to interact with them, tagging them and stuff, having them do stuff for us.
Mm-hmm.
But, I still remember the first thing I put on our Instagram story and was, blown away by the response, and how many people were viewing it and how quickly, and, our players look at all of it, and they will, give us feedback on certain things. So we might start Snapchat again, but we definitely, everything we do, me and my coordinator underneath me will always have long discussions about why are we doing this, should we do it, do we have the content to back it up, and then we have those conversations with our video people, our beat writer, all the people who are also creating content for us, just to make sure we're not jumping into anything or starting anything and we can't back it up, because obviously the internet is super public, and if we start something, we should probably finish it. So we're always definitely very careful about that.
Oh yeah. What's kind of the next step to that process, or how do the dominoes fall? I guess when we have a new feature, Instagram stories. Kinsey, you and your team, you're gonna I guess figure it out, and then work with the design team, work with the production team, so that we can get some content that is properly formatted for it and properly thought out for it. At what point does the marketing team start to swarm over and be like, hey, we have this content now. Let's try to serve some ads in Instagram stories or these other platforms. And then when does the core partnership teams come about and they go, hey, we have numbers on here. Can you help us sell this stuff and help us create some good sponsored content? What's that progression like? And I'm sure it's not the same for every team, but how did it happen for the Lightning? And is it still happening?
Yeah, we've come a huge way in the 4 years I've been here, in terms of communication and understanding other people's roles and understanding really that social isn't like an ad board. It's not like an agency.
Yeah.
That we are so directly connected to our fans and in their face. It still blows me away how many fans have push notifications turned on for our Twitter account. Because I'm even during a game day, you must be getting 100 push notifications. It's crazy, and our fans are so dedicated, and so when new things do come up, sometimes people will bring it to me and say hey, we have this idea, what do you think? Or sometimes I'll go to our video guy that I work the closest with, his name's Gabe, and I'll say hey, I have this idea, what if we try this for Instagram? And he'll be like, oh yeah, that's cool, or oh, I have this idea. So it's definitely become, and same with our sponsorship team.
Mm-hmm.
They are bringing kind of us to the table a lot more now, and they're coming to us with ideas, or we're going to meetings with our partners and kind of trying to educate everybody on every side of it so that we can make the best decision for the Lightning, because at the end of the day, the Lightning is the most important. So it's definitely a pretty big collaborative thing now. We can obviously still get better at it, but we've really made a lot of strides in the last 4 years to make sure that everyone is in the loop and people are buying in, and that we're doing stuff that makes sense and not just something that's kind of fleeting or in the moment because someone thinks it's cool. We're trying to do more lasting and impactful things, which I think probably everyone is trying to do.
And are you almost like playing the in-house teacher to show them sort of what can be done with it, and even teach them about the bare basics of it? Here's the metrics we get. Here's how we're measuring it. Here's how you can present it. And even I'm also kind of curious if that even applies at all to the players, if they're asking you about how best to use Instagram stories or whatnot. So how does your role end up playing out as kind of this in-house Lightning thought leader?
For sure, I think education is still a huge part of it, especially with some of our executives who might be a little older, or even people I work with who just because there's obviously still people my age who are social's not for me. Like, I don't care.
Yeah.
But they still have to. If you're working in sports, you still have to work with it, no matter what department you're in. So a lot of when it comes to like the sponsorship side, obviously we have the big corporate partners like Chase or Anheuser-Busch or places like that who obviously get social and are very good at it. And then we have some partners who are like maybe the local companies or the smaller ones where they really look to us to be like, hey, what is good? Like, are these numbers good, or things like that?
Yeah.
And then I've started actually with, I think probably like 3 years ago, I started with we call our game ops Lightning Vision.
Mm-hmm.
And our Lightning Vision team, when I would post, and I still do it now, when I post stuff that they're making for in-game, I send them recaps to our sponsorship team so they can see, hey, like that video that you made for, first intermission, first break, when I put it on Twitter, here's all the views it got.
That's great.
Here's all the impressions it got. Here's some like replies of people saying like, oh, this is sick, or this is so cool, can we have more? Just so they can see, like, because in-game stuff, you can't really quantify the response. Like, sure, we have 20,000 people in the building, but they're probably not all watching it. We're obviously on social. I can give them real numbers and say, like, here's who really interacted with this video that you just spent a month making. And that's really helped, too, like, people seeing the actual impact of their work, instead of me just saying, like, hey, that's a cool video, give it to me so I can put it on Instagram.
Yeah.
I like to show them, here's what people are saying and thinking, and I think that's like a pride point for them, too, because they don't normally get to see that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and that's a super fascinating insight, too, to think that, if we're putting this content out on social, that's the best place we can get some instant, genuine feedback from fans, and that can affect a number of different fan touch points and channels. So it might affect the in-game, entertainment. It might affect even the, the bumps that they put on the RSN. It might affect what goes in the email marketing. It might affect what goes in the paid social and the radio. So it's cool to think that you guys are trying to be proactive and use that real time feedback from social. A few more minutes left. Yeah, go ahead.
We can also obviously, and something I talk to our Lightning Vision crew about a lot is that they're talking to the people in house, the people in the seats in the actual building. But I mean, a lot of our audience on social isn't in Tampa. Like, we have a ton of people, all across the country, in different countries, because we have a pretty international team. So, like, we have a ton of fans in Russia. We have a ton of fans in Sweden, in the Czech Republic, and they all want, they can't come to a game. It's expensive just to come here even if you live in Tampa. If you live across the ocean, you have to put a plane ticket into that. So, I think too, them seeing like, whoa, this can really go everywhere, and seeing those demographics and showing them the numbers of who lives where, has really helped too. Because obviously social is international. We can go global with a click of a button. So that's been helpful too.
Yeah, you guys really do. A lot of NHL teams do, but you guys certainly have some superstar players that hail from all over the world, and that goes without saying.
Yeah.
A few more minutes left here with Kinsey Jenke, social media manager for the Tampa Bay Lightning. I feel like we're just getting started, though, Kinsey. And I kind of want to hear, we just talked about all these different platforms, different places where content is happening, where day-to-day projects are happening, where marketing is touching, where corporate partnerships is touching. And it's an area that we don't delve into too much on this show, and I'm interested in it, is how the Lightning go about keeping track of all that. And are you guys, is it a lot of meetings? Is it a lot of, do you guys use any project management tools? Do you guys submit creative briefs to the production team? Or how do those kind of campaigns and different content needs come together for you guys? How do you keep track of all the day-to-day? And even the day-to-day content scheduling?
Yeah, we have, so I go up through marketing, and we have weekly marketing meetings, we have smaller weekly digital meetings, and then we also have a weekly content meeting that has me, some PR people in it, our digital media coordinator who runs our website and our app, one of our broadcasting people is in it, so we use that a lot as an updating thing. Like, hey, this is what's coming up this week, or, we're going to announce this player move tomorrow at noon, or things like that. But we also use a lot of those meetings to talk about stuff like, hey, we have this event coming up. How are we going to cover it? Do we need a camera there? Do we need social there? Are we going to write a story about it? Is it just going to be a little B-roll piece, or are we going to need interviews? So we have kind of structured things like that, but, I mean, as we all know, a lot of things can happen off the cuff. So sometimes things are popping off on social, and I'll be like, oh, I think we have to say something about this. So I'll go to our head PR guy, and I'll say, hey, XYZ is happening on Twitter. Do we want to say something? Yeah. Sometimes we do, other times we don't. But a lot of the times, our PR guys will say, hey, yeah, we probably should address this. Here's how we're going to do it. So a lot of stuff is structured, but as you know, the internet is can be the Wild West. So sometimes we have to just kind of roll with it in the moment and sort of hustle behind the scenes to make stuff happen. But we try to be as proactive and strategic and plan as we can, but sometimes we just have to run and hopefully we catch up to what's going on.
Yeah. Is it a constant balance, too, of kind of living day to day with, what happened with the real-time content, and then also sort of when you have time to have some longer-term things kind of in the works, like, you might be working on the draft very, very soon, and then you also might have to be prepared that if a Braden Point contract gets announced or something. I'm saying that, not you. And just kind of thinking ahead while also making sure that you get stuff done that has to be done today, tomorrow. How do you guys kind of balance the time with those kinds of projects, or is your team more focused on the day-to-day stuff and the more the design team or production team is more focused on what's coming up?
Yeah, for sure, it's definitely a balance, and more so in the season because there's we obviously have 82 regular season games plus preseason playoffs, whatever. So a lot of our time, more so in the regular season, gets sucked into the day-to-day and getting game day stuff out and covering the team and, et cetera. But we definitely do, those content meetings have been pretty helpful in terms of shooting the more longer form content, or if we're doing, one-on-one sit-downs with players. We try to, our video team obviously is huge in that, and they probably definitely have to balance a lot more deadlines just because they are working on so many different things and so many different times, and videos take forever. It's not like you can just whip one up in a minute. So it's definitely a delicate balance of making sure we're obviously doing all the day-to-day stuff and getting it out on time, but stepping back and saying like, okay, we're working on this 3-part one-on-one series with Cooch, which we did last year, and it was awesome. We had 3 different versions, 3 different parts of it. Kaylee Chelios, who's our phone camera talent, our reporter, she did like a one-on-one sit-down with him after, talking about the contract he signed and, just getting to know him a little more, because he's definitely a little more like shy. And it was really cool because he was comfortable. He obviously knows Kaylee. I mean, they talked about Game of Thrones, his dog. So it was pretty cool. So we definitely try to work more of that stuff in too, because marketing our players obviously is huge, and we're really fortunate of how talented our team is. But we also know, we're still hockey in Florida, and we're still spending a lot of time too, like going out into the communities and educating people on hockey and teaching kids, like our community hockey team, which is led by Jay Feaster, they do incredible work, and they're getting so many kids involved in the game, even just with ball hockey. And then hopefully they can start skating and learning how to skate. But we definitely try to market our players and the game as much as we can, because we're obviously in a market that it's not most people don't grow up playing hockey in Florida. So we definitely are really aware of that, and we're pretty fortunate that our owner, Mr. Vinnick, is aware of that, and he supports pretty much any community initiative out there. So it's pretty cool getting to do stuff like that, and using our players to go out in the community and be with kids, and it's pretty fun to do, because it was pretty different growing up in New York, where everyone knew how to skate, and that's all we did.
Really like talking with Kinsey. She is really smart, really good at her job, and able to really distill some big ideas into clear, concise content as well. But listen to that full episode. I highly recommend it. She's doing great work now with the Florida Panthers, as noted, and keep an eye on them. Next up on the Best of Digital and Social Media Sports podcast, you're going to hear a little bit of my interview with Victoria McBride. Victoria has just been so great in her career, and now doing awesome stuff as an NBA social strategist and segment producer with Turner Sports, working on a lot of Turner's NBA properties, NBA on TNT, etc. When we spoke on the podcast, she was integrated marketing. She was the integrated marketing coordinator with the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl. She's also spent time. You're going to hear a little about her time with the Packers, with NC State. In this part of my interview, we're going to talk a little about NC State and what it was like building their brand. Their football program is doing great these days. Dave Doran, the head coach, was the head coach when she was there as well. We talk about what it was like to build that messaging, create that culture, that brand on social for NC State football and NC State athletics. Then we're going to talk about, of course, her time with the Peach Bowl. Activating on social. Bowl games are so interesting to me that you really, for them, they really have 2 big days during the year, and they really have to get it right and nail everything they can with social media sponsorships as well, and how it was like for Victoria to make sure they got the results they were looking for, and even if it was not cut and paste from what the sponsors originally wanted. It's really interesting stuff in my chat with Victoria. You can see why she is moving up so quickly in the space, and is doing a great job now, as mentioned, with Turner Sports. But listen up a little of my conversation with Victoria McBride.
We have a saying at NC State, hard tough together. That's something that Coach Doran brought to the program that you want to highlight. So every team kind of has those little things, and you want to sell that. I would say, in a sense, that it's not necessarily for either audience, but it's for the brand, and it's a space to share that, and it's a space to get people to feel emotionally connected to the brand. Whether that's the recruits or the fans, there are ways to hit both of those in whatever you're doing. So the variety of content is there, but there's recruiting specific things that you can do on the outside, whether that's through the coaches sharing content or even your players that are on your team. And then the team account, you have to hit that sweet spot.
Let's talk briefly about that, because I think we're kind of at this precipice of a whole industry really penetrating college athletics. You look at platforms you may be familiar with, like Open Doors or Greenfly or Influencer, starting to make a lot of connections, and it's all about getting content into the hands of the alumni, of the players, of the coaches. Was that a kind of a light bulb there, or was it still kind of early on? And is that even something you look at currently in your current role with the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl, is helping to disseminate content to the programs and then to the players? So how is it for NC State, and how is it kind of bubbling up now at your current role?
So I would say the need was always there. I think we also just have, once you gather enough content creators, you have tons of content, and you really can only push out so much on your team account, right? You can push out a little bit on the main athletics account, but between that, there's really 3 major platforms, 4 if you count Snapchat, but that's really more live content. But anything produced you might have in mass quantities. You have photos, you have video footage, highlights, things like that. So there's always a need there, and then just having a way to funnel that to the athletes. I think one thing that, really we've seen boom across college and pro sports is people are realizing the equity that is in the athlete's voice, whether that's a college athlete or a professional athlete. You look at LeBron, you look at Zion, people care about what they have to say. It could be anything. They could be saying, I drink Dr. Pepper every day, and they might not be getting paid to say that, but there's equity in that. So, I mean, I think the need was always there, but really just realizing how to solve that problem. Those platforms like Open Doors and things have done a great job. For us, I mean, it's really more working directly with the teams, and then they'll disseminate to their players, just because we are an event, so that's the way the relationship works. But we do share content with teams that play in our games. We share content with the playoffs when we're a playoff semifinal. So there are a lot of different places that we'll try to funnel content through that help us get brand recognition. And then also, I mean, we want the players to share content while they're here. We want other players to see that they're having a great experience when they're in our game. And we want this to be a destination that people want to come to.
Let's talk briefly about just, I mean, overall, but specifically as you're coming up at NC State, where kind of the marketing and sales component, if it did come into play on the digital and social side. I mean, if you think about, especially college, it's recruiting, it's branding, it's being that cool brand that people want to be a part of, students want to be a part of, student athletes want to be a part of. But was there ever like a, hey, make sure we include some calls to action to buy tickets, or let's make sure we get the word out to students to come to the student section and get there to welcome the guys as they walk in the stadium. And was that a part of it as well, or is it really just let's get the brand to be cool and people will get to know the ticket buying process, traditions, and student ticketing and all that?
Yeah, so there I mean everybody has the requirements is kind of one of the things that I would call it. I mean, you're there to sell tickets, you're there to build the brand you want people to purchase, otherwise you're out of business, right? But the way to do that, I think, is by building the brand and creating great content. So you have to get people to that platform first in order to sell them something. So if you don't have great content, they're never going to be there in the first place. So I think for us, really the focus when I was at NC State was building the brand, having it seen as something that we wanted to be seen as, right? So at that time, another emphasis was our partnership with Adidas. So we had just re-signed a contract with them. This is when, a little bit after Kanye released like his first pair of shoes, and Adidas was really back in that solidified number 2 spot. So they've really stepped up their game recently, content-wise, but really sales-wise across the board. So our relationship with Adidas, and then what that meant for the brand, what that meant to NC State, what qualities we could take from their brand, and how we were meshing that with who we were. So building that, establishing that. I mean, we went through things like brand voice on the platforms. What kind of emojis are we using? Are certain emojis appropriate in any capacity? Do we only want to use emojis that are directly relatable to us? So we dug really deep into that. But it was really more about building the brand and establishing that, and then knowing that the people would come to look for tickets once we did that.
Who was NC State in general, and when you were there, and even now today? I mean, the state of North Carolina and even South Carolina, it's so crowded with college programs. You have Duke, you have UNC. You grew up right near Wake Forest, and how did NC State? What was the brand, and did you guys intentionally seek to find something that would be different from those those other blue bloods?
Yeah, absolutely. So being in the Triangle, Duke and UNC are both 30 minutes away in either direction. So that's something that we're constantly aware of. And while basketball might be bigger for those programs, and some would even argue bigger for NC State, I would disagree, but some would argue that. I think that's something that you're always consciously aware of, because you have to be competing against them, right? Because you're competing for the same audience, you're in the same area, you're all trying to get the same people in this 20-mile radius to come to your games and to your events. So we were definitely conscious of that. I'm sorry, repeat the second part of the question again.
Yeah. I mean, how did you guys seek to really build that unique niche? I mean, you look at Duke, UNC, they have this. You got at NC State. You guys couldn't go back and all of a sudden you'll have a long history of great success. You have the Jim Valvano year, of course, and you have some great memories. But what was that kind of role that you guys carved out for yourselves to be a distinct brand down there?
Yeah, I mean, looking at who we were, I know you asked that, we were a very traditional brand. We were very vertical in the sense of, we had our red and white. We had everything was tradition there. So we are a brick campus. The bricks are really important to us. So I think for us, it was about building on that history and tradition. We have much of our season ticket buying fan base is older alumni. So when they're coming to games, they want very traditional things. So there was a little bit of knocking of heads, I would say, really, and I think this is everywhere, between like the traditional influencers and the people who are seeing, okay, we want our traditional red and white uniforms, we don't want to see any alternates, anything like that, versus trying to recruit younger kids, right? So there's always, and I mean, like I said, that's anywhere, but so that was one struggle that we went through, but really I would say we were a very traditional brand starting out, and we realized that we needed to push the envelope, and it was kind of time for something new. So our focus was really taking and building on that tradition. So building on the brick pattern, that was something that we incorporated into our graphics, that was incorporated into our uniform. That I think this did a really great job working with us on keeping that tradition, but kind of spicing it up and making it something new. And I think traditions are really unique and they're really important. And I've worked with two very traditional brands, the Packers and NC State, both I would say are very traditional. And those things are really important, so I think it's important not to forget those. But for us, it was about, okay, how can we take that and how are we moving forward with that? You know, we don't want to stay stagnant in one spot. We don't want to be the same forever, because if you don't change, you're not evolving. So for us, it was really about taking and building on that tradition and incorporating those things. We do have Jim Valvano. We do have some of those great memories, but we didn't have anything in the current that we could stick to. So it's like, okay, how can we create something new that we can build from? And I think, I mean, even seeing now that I've left, they've hired new creative staff and things like that. They've done a great job kind of forging in that new space. Yeah, no, it's really well put, and I like how you talk about incorporating the brand into graphics and even how the synergy with the uniforms as well. It's super cool. So tell me, you stole my segue there a little bit of talking about the brand of NC State and then compared to the historic brand of the Packers, which is just pristine and this. And Lambeau Field, a place that they turn on the lights and it sells out like nothing, and people just worship the brand as it is. So, what was that transition like? And also just going from a college space where you have a ton of different programs you're trying to deal with, and then going to the Packers where it's an NFL team. What was the biggest kind of learnings early on there, and what were some of the differences?
I think the biggest difference for me coming in initially was access. It's funny because it's different across all pro teams, so people's answer would be different depending on where they went or where they worked. But for me, working in the college space, you always have access to the team. You pretty much always have access to the coaches, where in the NFL that's very different. You have access to them at certain times, or you have to schedule things with them. So that immediate access wasn't there, and I think that was kind of the biggest shift for me initially, like right out of the gate. Brand-wise, I think the Packers had already established a brand. There was really no rebrand they were going through. They weren't trying to find their voice. That's something they've had for a long time, and something that's been successful and they haven't needed to change. So going into that, I would say those were kind of the two biggest just initial things right off the bat that were kind of a shocker for me. But and then I was also working on the sponsored content side. That was something I'd never done before. So learning a lot about that space, which has been really important in this current role, trying to get things sponsored and trying to develop content that has an opportunity to get sponsors. That's been huge for us here. But I think right out of the gate, I would say access was a huge thing. And then also just the fact that they already have an established voice. So how can I come in and improve on that? While remembering, like, the Packers are a traditional brand, but a lot of our audience that is on social aren't necessarily those legacy fans. Right. They aren't necessarily the fans that have, worked a concession game at Lambeau Field for 30 years. And that was a really cool and unique thing about Green Bay, is that everyone really had some kind of tie to Lambeau Field and the Packers, whether they had volunteered to work concessions or, they'd shoveled snow out of the stadium at one point. That was one of the things I really enjoyed about the community there. But knowing the difference between that legacy audience and then what our social audience was, and being able to identify that and how to connect with both of them was really, really important too. No, it's really cool. I mean, you have fans that grew up watching Bart Starr. You have fans that grew up watching Brett Favre. You have fans that grew up watching Aaron Rodgers, and it's just these generations come together under the same umbrella. That's awesome. I do want to hear about sponsored content, because that's an area that I'm pretty cognizant of the NFL space, and Green Bay is one that has always caught my eye as someone that's active in the sponsored content space and does a good job of integrating their partners. So what was the setup like for sponsored content when you got there? Was there a defined kind of
sellable assets. This is stuff that we're gonna do. We're gonna put up a drive graphic. So let's find an auto sponsor for that. Or was it a little bit more other way around? Hey, here's some partners that want to do something in social. Let's develop some assets for them.
It's a little bit of both, and I would say that. I mean, even now in every space, I think you have to be. The process isn't really one way, and that's the right way. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you get approached by sponsors, and they're like, "Hey, we want to be active in the digital space. We want some kind of digital marketing from you guys. We want some sort of social play here on whatever activation that we're doing." So sometimes that's the case. Sometimes you have an asset, and you're like, "This would be really great. Here's my idea for a sponsor," whether that's a drink sponsor, whether that's alcoholic or non-alcoholic, or whether it's a car sponsor, like you mentioned. So. There was a little bit of both, I would say, in that case. We did have some sponsored content contracts already signed, but then our sales team would also go out and pitch things, whether they were ideas we'd have, or they'd come to us and say, "Hey, the sponsor wants to be active in this space. How can we integrate them in a way that makes sense?" So that was really, my job was more execution, but I was also brought in on strategy there. And I think the biggest learning process for me was how to work and how to communicate with those sponsors. And making it really important to have content that makes sense. You don't want to just slap a logo on something because that doesn't really bring value to them.
Right.
And so while they might think that does bring value, you want to show them why it doesn't and what would work better. So for me, the sponsored content setup, I mean, we had things that were already going, but there was a little bit of both there. So we'd have sponsors that would come and say they wanted to be in the space, and we'd have content that we wanted to get sponsored.
Is sponsored content, and I'm saying this as someone who has worked in the space with sponsored content and understands that a good play on words or a pun is oftentimes the foundation of a piece of sponsored content. Like, hey, it's the keys to the game, so let's make this tied to a car, or it's the health report, so let's tie this to a healthcare company. It seems like these brand intersections certainly work really well, but does a good piece of sponsored content generally, do you start with how can we take some content we're already doing and kind of make it a play on words to tie in with the brand, or is it getting a little more sophisticated than that and actually getting a product or service involved in the content itself?
There are a lot of ways to do it. So, I mean, when you're communicating on social, you really have two things. You have copy and visuals, whether that's video or a graphic or a photo. Those are kind of your three main visuals, and then you have copy, and that's it. That's all you have to work with. So play on words is a huge part of it. I think that's one way to naturally integrate the two in a way that makes sense, just because that's one of the only options that you really have. But then there are also on-site activations, and you want to bring those to life digitally too. Yeah. So there are some ideas that we have in the works with Chick-fil-A. So I can't spill them all, but trying to find ways to bring some on-site activations to life is also a good idea. Also, how can you be innovative in the space? You have to think about breaking up what's already in the feed. So how can you do that with a brand?
Yeah.
I've been fortunate to work with some really cool ones. Chick-fil-A is a great one. Most people love Chick-fil-A, so that makes my job a little bit easier in the sense of working with sponsored content for them. But we do have other sponsors as well that we have. So, I mean, one piece of content that we came up with last year was our board of advisors, who are our bowl representatives, travel to games every season just to kind of keep an eye on teams, get to know them that could possibly be in our game. So we did a Peach Bowl on the Road series, and that was something that we were going to already do, but I was like, hey, we have an opportunity to just get this sponsored. It'd be really easy. It has a name that would be easy to integrate. So we ended up working with Kia on that. So they sponsored that series, but it was just Peach Bowl on the Road driven by Kia. So sometimes you'll have content ideas and you're like, hey, this would make perfect sense for a sponsor. Sometimes there will be on-site activations that you want to promote socially, or that might have some digital aspect to them. Chick-fil-A does a pop-up at all of our events, but last year at the kickoff game, they did I don't even know how to explain it. It was almost like this immersive experience. So you went in and there was several different rooms. One of them was Nugget Land, and there was a ton of chicken nuggets, and there was a waffle fry pit, which was really cool. So there are ways. We obviously covered that live socially. So that was one way to integrate that content because it was such a cool space. It was very visual, and that was something that we wanted to highlight. They also do a cow drop at our games, so we always tend to share that because that's content that people love.
Yeah.
So there are ways to do it with live content of like cool things that are happening on site, and then also things that might just be a natural fit from a content perspective.
Let's talk briefly about KPIs and reporting as well. And real quick, just having a great conversation here with Victoria McBride, integrated marketing coordinator for Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl. Just a few minutes left. Want to hear about reporting, and I think it's oftentimes we default to engagement and impressions, which is certainly fine, but I think it's important to give context to those impressions, and that a drive graphic sponsored by Kia is different from the On the Road series where you're driving a Kia and you're in the car and you're getting a lot more exposure. Those impressions are not equivalent in terms of value, but oftentimes we just report impressions. So what kind of KPIs and reporting do your partners tend to ask for if they do? And how do you guys seek to really convey the proper value? And or is it really just still we're defaulting to the highest numbers because that's the vanity metrics that the suits want to see?
I would say, people are still looking at engagement and impressions as the main two.
Mm-hmm.
You still want to see, obviously, you want to know how many people potentially could have seen your content, and then how many people were intrigued enough to engage with it. One thing that I like to look at that's really important to me is engagement rate. So what's the ratio, right? Or the ratio to how many people could have possibly seen our content, and the ratio to how many people actually thought it was cool enough for them to stop and look at, or stop and watch the video again or click on something. So for me, that's something that's really important because it details what things are catching people's eyes. So looking at, trying to find trends there in the engagement rate, that's huge. And then also knowing that, some people are looking at impressions versus a big company or an NFL team they might be sponsoring. Clearly we don't have the same following because we're not a team, one, and then also, so our audience changes all the time, which is a challenge for us. But then, there might be a team that has 1 million followers out there and you're doing sponsored content with them and they have a much higher number of impressions, but their engagement rate is 0.2%, right? Yeah. Versus ours, which might be 4. So you really want to, the value there is, an engagement rate I think is huge. Just getting to see, what the ratio is between the people that are seeing your content and the people that are actually engaging with it. I think that also tells you how well that you understand your audience, right? So if you have a consistent engagement rate and that engagement rate is high, that means that you understand your audience, you understand the content that they're looking for. If that engagement rate is consistently low, it's an indicator that you need to kind of change your strategy. You need to change the way you're serving up content. You might need to add more visuals. You might need to take some out. You might need to tweak what those look like. So just knowing that to me is a huge indicator of the success of your content strategy.
Great stuff from Victoria McBride. Again, then with the Chick-fil-A Peach Bowl, now with Turner Sports, doing lots of great stuff with their NBA properties. Listen up to that full conversation. I think you're going to enjoy it. And also check her out on social media. She's a good follow as well. Last up, we have reached the last excerpt for this episode of the Best of Digital Social Media Sports podcast. If you're still with me, you're going to get a good one to go out on. You're going to hear a part of our interview with Doug Wernert. At the time we spoke, he was director of social media for the Detroit Pistons NBA team. He's now doing social media at Cardinal Financial Group. But interesting conversation with Doug. We're going to talk about what Detroit basketball is all about, how they turn that into a brand on social, what it's like for them to evaluate their performance, whether it's against other teams, against other markets, as well as just internally. We also talk about what it was like to really maximize key moments and how they work across departments to really make the most of social, make the most of the stories that they had to tell. Just real interesting stuff. Listen to a little of my conversation with Doug Wernert, again, then director of social media for the Detroit Pistons, now doing social media with Cardinal Financial.
Yeah, so the Pistons brand is really Detroit basketball. A lot of people are probably familiar with our announcer, Mason's famous call of Detroit basketball, which he started, I think, in the early 2000s. We kind of say that it's a sound that sort of brings us all together, and it's very uniquely to us. It's a reflection of a love of our team and the love of our city, and we try to carry that out in everything that we do, where we tell the story of the organization, both on and off the court. And I would say especially off the court. A couple of years ago, we moved out of the Palace of Auburn Hills into Little Caesars Arena, so moving right downtown into a great new arena, and we're actually moving our corporate headquarters down there in a couple months into a new performance center with Henry Ford Health System, which is going to be really exciting. We're going to be basketball and the business side are all going to share the same building. We're going to be kind of right near the arena and right in the middle of the city, so it's a very exciting time for us. And then with that also comes a big initiative to work with the city of Detroit. Our community and social responsibility department has a lot of initiatives that obviously we help support on social. And then we also launched a program this past year called Basketball for All, where we're giving basketballs, I think 50,000 over the next 5 years or so to kids in Detroit, to encourage them to play basketball with a healthy lifestyle and things like that. And then we're also doing a lot of court renovations in the city. So it's a big initiative, kind of led by our owner, Tom Gores. He's a big believer in impacting the community. So I would say from an organizational standpoint, obviously that's a big initiative. The move downtown into our new headquarters, that's a big initiative. So we're trying to kind of tell those stories on our social channels, in addition to obviously everything that's happening with the team, with our new players, and Coach Casey and everything that's going to happen next year.
It's super cool. I mean, I feel like, maybe the Pistons are not unique in this sense, but certainly very intertwined with the city, perhaps more than any other. And your hashtag says it right there. And the famous call, of course, is, Detroit and the Pistons are one and the same, maybe more so than, other cities and their teams. So it's really cool to hear that play out like that. And how does it actually happen? I mean, it's easy to say, okay, here's what Detroit basketball is all about, but you have so many different pieces of content going out. You have so many opportunities to establish a voice, establish a visual look and a feel, whether it's templates or hashtags, obviously, how your emails look, how your website looks, what you guys are writing about, what you guys are pitching to other writers to possibly write about. How does it actually play out where Detroit basketball really is this North Star that's penetrating everything from graphic design to content to video to how you are live tweeting a game?
Yeah, a lot of it is collaboration just with all the different departments and making sure everybody's on the same page. One of the things that we do that we just wrapped up in the off season is we have all of our different content channels that you see on Pistons.com and on social. So we have all these different content channels that have all these different elements in them. So there might be videos, graphics, blog posts, in-arena activations, and things like that. So what we do is at the end of every season, we kind of go through all the channels. We take a look at how they performed, what we did, what we want to change next season, and figure out what the number. We're very big on numbers, seeing how content performed and how we think it's going to do the following season. We package all those together. We make sure everybody is on board with that, and it's a big effort between myself, our head of production, our creative director, my boss, our partnerships team, make sure everybody knows these are the stories that we're looking to tell. These are the assets that we're going to use to do it, and then use our sponsorship team can use that to pitch to prospective sponsors, depending on what they're looking to do and who their audience is, and then we kind of go from there and execute that. So it's a lot of making sure everybody is defining what we want to do, and then making sure everybody's on the same page with it, and then going out and doing it.
Yeah, I'm curious too. Do you guys end up with? You have this overarching theme and brand that is penetrating all of your various channels. Is there kind of like a bunch of content buckets almost? Like, okay, we're going to have some humanizing stories. We're going to have some off the court. We're going to have some inside the X's and O's of basketball. I mean, I know it's all under that same umbrella, but how do you guys go about kind of allocating that content mix with your resources?
Yeah, it's a mix of, like you said, both on the court and off the court. There's some player features that kind of showcase their personality. There's player highlight specific stuff. There's all the community activations, like I mentioned. So basically, we just kind of look at all those, and everything gets kind of assigned to different video editors or different designers, or in my case, if there's a social activation, my team will handle it, and then we go and do it, and then we kind of adjust as needed.
Is it kind of almost you want to make sure that we are hitting on all these objectives? And I mean, if you're trying to just maximize your overall impressions or reach or any of these other vanity metrics, yeah, let's just throw up some Blake Griffin highlights every night or every day, and we'll rack up those numbers. But hey, we need to make sure that we're telling the story of what we're doing in the city of Detroit, what we're doing with youth basketball, what we're doing off the court, and you kind of have to make sure that you are you're balancing the numbers as well as make sure that the stories are getting told that you want to get told.
Yeah, exactly. We have a mix of things that we're looking to do, and then like I said, we kind of go and do it, and we're always measuring.
So tell me, when it comes to that data, especially, I mean, I think a lot of teams will work with a vendor or use a service or use whatever, a Hootsuite or another type of measuring service. Is there someone that kind of owns data across the organization for CRM, for analytics, for email, for social, or is social almost its own beast, and you guys are managing the data yourselves and analyzing reports yourselves?
Yeah, we work closely with our data analytics department that kind of controls all the different data inputs. At least on the social side, we use a lot of the first-party data from Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. I have my own dashboards that I create with that kind of breaks everything out by content channel and by sponsor and kind of what it is, and we kind of slice and dice it from there. And then we use other tools to measure sponsorship impact, whether it's on broadcast or on social. So we kind of combine everything into a nice little report to give a valuation for our sponsorship team. We also use CrowdTangle, which is the NBA helps us out with that, which is a great tool, obviously, to kind of see what's kind of popping across the league and in professional sports. Our sponsorship team uses that all the time to kind of see what is happening in other markets with the sponsors we have or prospective partners.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, we kind of know what's going to hit. That a big highlight is gonna do really well, or a player signing and those kind of things. But we're always kind of looking to see what else is out there and how we can apply it to our business.
Yeah, I think that's a theme that comes up in a lot of my conversations with folks on the podcast. Is we the predictable stuff is easy. After a win, we're going to have higher numbers than we will after a loss. But it's kind of what are those outliers? What are those ones that go, that was surprising, or that over-indexed from where we expected it to go? Are you guys trying to find those? I don't want to call them the unicorns, but those outliers, so to speak. Or are you generally looking at the data and what it's telling you, or are you asking questions of the data? And trying to glean insights in that sense? I know it's a couple different ways you can kind of go at it from an analytics perspective.
Yeah, we're looking at it for at least, well, first of all, from our perspective on the content that we're doing, to see how it's performing kind of relative to everything else that we're doing. Mm-hmm. And then, like I said, just seeing what else is kind of out there and if it's something that we might be able to apply.
Now, are you guys generally benchmarking against, especially when you're using CrowdTangle, are you guys looking at what are our counterparts in the Detroit market doing, or what are our counterparts in the NBA doing, or even beyond that, what are our counterparts in the NBA that are having similar seasons in terms of wins and losses doing? How do you guys tend to try to benchmark while keeping the context in mind?
Yeah, we kind of look at everybody. Obviously we look at the other Detroit markets because we are competing for in this market for the entertainment dollar, mm-hmm. and then obviously in the league. To see what everybody else is doing. I always think that the more data you have, the better, and the more you kind of explore, the more you can learn from. So, I always cast a wide net on those kind of things.
Yeah, and the Pistons are certainly unique in that you guys. I feel like you guys have been contenders for a long time, but never, and at least not recently, the number 1 seed or number 2 seed, with the LeBron years in the East especially. So how do you guys kind of navigate that during the season when it's a lot of, will we make the playoffs, will we not? Are we going to be an 8 seed, a 7 seed? Are we going to be out of it? Are we going to trade some of our expiring contracts? Are we going to be a buyer? Are there those conversations happening during the season, or is there a certain point when it comes down from team ops that, hey, these guys are or even PR, it looks like these guys are going to be traded, so let's make sure we're ready to massage how we portray that to fans?
Yeah, I would say there's sort of always a storyline, even if you didn't make the playoffs, or you are making the playoffs, or you're on a hot streak or on a cold streak. There's always storylines to tell, kind of within the team, whether it's a rookie who's making an impact, or a player who's been performing well, or a potential move or something like that. I would say just look at the past Pistons season as a good example. We started off really hot. Blake scored 50. I think it was the 3rd or 4th game of the year. People were really excited. You get to December, the team hits a rough patch, and then they turn it around, and they're the hottest team in the league for about a month. We're hitting all these threes. We're like the top offensive rated team in the league, and it's really exciting. We beat the Raptors. Every time we play them, go Pistons. We beat the Raptors every time we play them. And then we're getting close to the playoffs. We're making our push, and then Blake gets hurt, and we're not sure if he's playing in all the games, kind of leading up to the playoffs. And then we get in kind of right at the end. So it was throughout that season, there's always all these different storylines. There's kind of Blake's leadership. There's the young guys doing their thing. There's Dre racking up all these double-doubles and kind of having a career year. And then when we're getting close to the playoff push, it's, are we going to make it? Working on the playoff messaging. Kind of what's going to happen if Blake can't play. So there's just all these different storylines kind of throughout the year, and we just have to be ready for all those and figure out the best way to tell the stories of the team. Obviously working closely with our PR department and our production department to make sure everybody's on the same page.
Yeah, it's always better when you're battling for a playoff spot than if you are looking like you're going to be whatever, a bad team that's looking at the lottery or halfway through the season and you're already thinking about who's going to be in the draft. You'd much rather be in that playoff push, no doubt. And I think people don't realize too, like how good of a season that Blake Griffin and Andre Drummond had up there. I mean, those guys are two of the best players in the NBA this past year, especially. I mean, obviously getting Blake was huge. You also got a new coach, Dwayne Casey, coming off Coach of the Year. So when those big events happen, it starts to come down from the top. Do you kind of have a game plan? Do you kind of know what content needs to be produced and what's going to be happening, who's responsible for what, or you kind of just react on the fly and make sure that everyone is covering their bases when the news comes down?
Yeah, I would say in the case of Blake, at least to me, it was kind of a surprise when the news broke, but obviously very excited to get a great player coming to the city. So again, it is sort of an all hands on deck approach where the video team make sure they have somebody at the airport when he gets off the airplane, so they can have the first interview with him. The PR staff is setting up the press conference. Our creative directors making sure we have a photographer kind of ready there from a social perspective. We're getting all our assets ready for the guys that had just been traded. We're making sure that we're removing them from the website and from any sort of banners that we had and things like that. So it's a big kind of production in a short period of time. But that's what makes it fun. And then in the case of Coach Casey, a new coach, like you said, Coach of the Year. He has his own vision for the team and his own approach. So just being able to let him tell that story, and then using sort of his words and his vision and using that. So whether it's in a video for season tickets or something that we use for lead acquisition, just making sure that we've identified the assets that we want to create and then going out and doing it.
Awesome chatting with Doug. You can check out that full episode and all these episodes that you've heard today on the podcast feed or at dsmsports.net. But that'll do it for this episode of the Digital and Social Media Sports Podcast. Again, you were listening to the best of, where you get a little taste of a few interviews. And again, the podcast feed is full of interviews like that. So thanks for tuning in. Again, I'm your host, Neil Horowitz. Hit me up on Twitter at NJH287, where you can follow me and tell me how you like in the podcast. And if you have any good ideas for guests, also you can check me out on LinkedIn, where I post more content. The website, as noted, is dsmsports.net, where you can see more episodes and content. And of course, check out the podcast, subscribe on whichever podcast platform you like. Until next time, we're going to be back with new episodes coming very soon. Because 2022, we're looking forward to lots of more great interviews, always more to learn, always stories to tell, always insights to drive, and looking forward to sharing it all with you again in the year to come. Until next time, this is Neil Horowitz signing off for the Digital and Social Media Sports Podcast.